Hello and welcome. This is Colby Cheese, and you're watching Summoner Academy, your home for League of Legends tips, tricks, and strategies. Hey, what's up, Summoners? This is episode 3 of Summoner Academy. How to last hit properly and take lane control. And so, in other words, this is the episode where I teach you how to be a boss, how to win games. Because let me just tell you right now, the person who wins the lane is probably going to win the game. Well, usually. If you win all lanes, you're going to win the game. That's just generally how it goes. Now, there's obviously some fallbacks to that, like, you screw up later and whatnot. But if you take a look at most games that are won, it's probably going to be, or the winning team is probably going to be the ones who have most of the CS in the lanes and who had most of the kills in the lanes as well. So let's just take a look at what it takes to do that. A lot of people that I see play this game who don't really understand the concepts of lane control and last hitting will do a lot of silly things, well, at least to me, a lot of silly things, such as try and harass way too hard on the enemy champion, or and focus way too much on that and not on last hitting, or they'll get ganked in the lane and not understand how to actually counter that, and they'll just do things that don't make sense to more veteran players. If you look at the creep scores of top players, they're always going to be extremely high, and that's because it's very important. So let me just try and put it into perspective for you. A champion kill, which is around 300 gold, is worth about 15 to 17 creep score, depending on how far in the game you are. That's it, 15 to 17 creep score. So if you're able to, that's about 2.5 creep waves. If you're able to get 2.5 creep waves of farm in, then you've already made a champion kill. Now, over the course of a game, people can get between 200 and 300 creep score. So just imagine how much gold that is compared to just trying to go harass and get maybe one extra kill. Yeah, it's a big deal. So another thing to think about is, like, well, what creep score should I be aiming for? Like, how much do I need to do? All right, the best way to put it is you need to be getting around 95% of every single creep wave that you get. Obviously, if you are the support, that's not the case. And if you're the jungler, then it's a completely different story for another video altogether. If you want a benchmark to kind of judge yourself by, try and get about 34 creep score by 5.5 minutes, and around 10 minutes you would like to have about 75. That's a pretty high number, and if you can get to that number, then you're doing well. Just keep that up. You want to watch this every single game. If you can remind yourself and just keep it conscious in your mind that last hitting is the most important thing for you to do in the early laning phases, then you'll have much, much higher success in this game. Even if you didn't really learn a lot of the other concepts, or if you're still new at the game and you're trying to get better, this is always the default thing to fall back on is, hey, I'm just going to last hit really, really well and build up some awesome items and defeat my opponents that way. That's what you want to do. So I'd like to go over some different scenarios with you on how the lane is going to play out. All right, when you get to your lane, there's going to be a couple things that can happen. First of all, I see this sometimes, your enemy is going to push your lane to your tower as quick as possible. In other words, you'll see them just sitting there, auto-attacking, auto-attacking, auto-attacking. All right, if this happens, what you want to do is simply match them. If they're going to auto-attack a creep down, you need to auto-attack one of their creeps down. Just try and keep the waves even. You don't want to overcompensate and push back. You just want to make sure that if they kill 3 of your front, melee minions, they don't still have all 3 front melee minions on their side. You just want to keep it absolutely even and try and freeze the lane in the middle as much as possible. This gives you the most amount of breathing room. So the reason for this is if they push all the way to your tower, sure, that puts them in kind of a bad position, and if you have a good jungle ganker, but what it does is it allows them to either roam around and go missing, which is dangerous to your team. They can go potentially gank somewhere else. Also, you're going to lose creep score at your tower, and then you'll have to, try and weave in there and get some last hits from your tower, which we'll talk about later. But the main thing is keep your lane frozen in the middle. Or even more ideal, keep your lane frozen as close to your tower without being in range of your tower attacking it as possible, and that gives you the most control over your lane. This is especially dangerous in the top lane. If you get stuck at the enemy's tower, but right outside of the tower, so the tower is not actually pushing your creeps back, you're in a very dangerous situation of being ganked, and vice versa for the enemy team. So if you can kind of bait your enemy champion to maybe attack you once and get their minions to stop attacking so that it will push to your tower, and then you can freeze it right there at that critical spot, then you'll do a lot better in your lane, and you won't have to worry about ganks as much, and they're going to have to buy a lot of extra wards and potentially just die a lot. Now, there are cases where you're going to want to push to their tower, and those are if you want to try and set up some dragon control, or you want to go gank another lane, or you just want to make your presence less known, so you want to hide back and not let them know where you're at. Or let's say you want to go back and buy some items. You want to take a look at your gold and figure out if you have enough money to go and buy some items. If you're able to easily push to their tower and they can't push back very quickly, then you could potentially, build up a nice creep wave against them, push to their tower, go back and get to your base, and by the time you get back, you should have only lost 1 or 2 minions. You never want to go back whenever your lane is pushing. You will always know if the enemy tries to push really hard into your tower, you want to push really hard back because you know they want to be back to their base, and you want to make it as hard as possible for them to do that. For last hitting tips, the best thing to do whenever you're just sitting there waiting for the creep health to get low is don't auto attack ever, unless of course you're trying to match your creep waves like I said earlier. Just do some pacing back and forth, and that's the easiest way to keep your character from last hitting. You can also stop moving, but the best thing to do is just pace back and forth, and once you see the damage that the minions are doing to the enemy minions, that's what you want to keep your eye on, is like which minions your minions are attacking, and try and judge in your head, okay, each wave of attacks from my minions is going to do this much damage, and try and aim your last hit to hit them right after the last wave of attacks that would kill the creep, and that should be easy enough for you to understand once you get the hang of your particular champion's attack animation. Now, I always tell people to try and focus on just a few different champions, and this is one reason as well. It's a lot easier to last hit when you're used to playing a certain champion. So one easy thing to do to just kind of get the hang of a champion is to go play them in a practice custom game really quick, and just play it for a few minutes and try and get all of the minions in the creep waves like every single time. Since it's just a custom game, you should be able to get every single minion no problem. When you're forced to attack minions at your tower, it can vary based on the type of champion, how much damage you do with your auto attacks, but usually with the ranged minions, you'll attack them once, the tower will attack them, and then you attack them once. And then for the melee minions, the tower will attack them twice, and you'll attack them once, and then you'll get the last hit that way. So try and keep that in mind rather than just continually auto-attacking minions at the tower, because that'll never work out. Sometimes you will have to use your abilities at the tower. The best thing to do is just try and practice, again, in a custom game with the champion that you're going to be playing, and decide or figure out how much damage you can actually do to the minions and which combination works best for you. Okay, so far everything's been pretty basic. Let's try and spice it up just a little bit. Let's talk about how to actually harass the enemy champions and help you win your lane while also last hitting. So this may be a little bit beyond what you need to worry about right now. If you're still having trouble last hitting, then don't even try and worry about harassing, because if you go in and try and harass, you've got an extra thing to think about on your mind, and you're going to miss a lot of creep score by trying to attack the enemy champion. So once you get the hang of last hitting really properly, then you can kind of transition into adding in harassment to the enemy champion safely. First of all, one way to do it is to use your abilities, because when you auto attack an enemy champion, that forces your lane not only to push, but it forces their enemy champion or their creeps to attack you, and you're going to take extra damage. So unless you have the creep advantage, you don't really want to auto attack the enemy champion. In other words, if you've got like 5 extra minions than they do, then sure, go ahead and auto attack, because if they auto attack you back, boom, all of your minions are going to attack them and do a lot of damage, and they'll probably have a lot less and it won't do as much to you. Otherwise, try not to auto attack. Okay, the other thing is, if you're going to use your abilities, you probably don't want to use your nuking abilities until like level 3, when you've leveled it up to level level 2, because you're going to waste a whole lot of mana, and you don't want to spam mana, especially against the champions who have a lot of sustain in the lane. You want to wait until you get a little bit more damage and your spells are a little more mana efficient. This is really varied based on which champion you're playing, and it's hard to say this in a general sense, so you're just going to have to get used to your particular champion. But that's the general sense, is use abilities, not auto attacks, unless you have the creep advantage. If you are going to auto attack, just try and get in like one auto attack and then back off so that the creeps don't hit you more than a couple of times. Another thing is, really try to avoid getting overly aggressive in the lane whenever the enemy has 1 or 2 creep waves built up. Because let's say you actually do die, what's going to happen is they're going to finish off your creep wave, and then you've got 2 full creep waves, and it's going to push all the way to your tower, and you're going to lose a massive amount of experience and creep score, and you could potentially even lose a tower if it was lucky enough for your opponent. So my best advice is to get aggressive when you've got a creep wave built up against them and force them back, but never be aggressive whenever you've got creep waves built up on their side. Also, a rule of thumb is don't harass if it's going to cost you a minion kill. It's not worth taking off, 100, 200 of their HP if you lose 1 creep score. So always decide to go for the minion kill before the harass. Sometimes you can kind of fake harass and act like you're going to run up and attack them, which pushes them back, and then turn around and attack the minion instead if it's close enough to be last hitted. And that's one of the main strategies I use whenever I'm harassing / last hitting in the lane. This you can also consider another form of pacing, like I mentioned earlier, where you want to pace back and forth to auto attack minions. Sometimes I'll pace at the enemy champion, which kind of scares them back, but then I'll pace backwards and attack that creep, and that's just my form of pacing. That's really all I can give in this particular video for harass tips, but it is quite a lot if you actually use those concepts and you take them into account. Obviously, each champion is different and each champion combination is going to be different, so just keep that in mind. Some more things that you want to consider, though, are things such as surviving ganks. Alright, so when you're in the lane, you want to always be very aware of who the enemy jungler is. So if you haven't already looked, be sure to push tab and see who has smite and who's jungling in the lane. Is it a Warwick? Is it a Rammus? Is it somebody who can gank you early, really easily? Or is it somebody who's less likely to be able to gank you easily early on? That's what you need to always be asking yourself. Always ask yourself questions in the lane of what can the enemy champions do to me and what scenarios are going to make me most vulnerable and where am I safe? You always want to be asking yourself those questions. So for example, if it's a Warwick who is jungling, you know that you're probably fairly safe, especially in the middle lane, from getting ganked. All he can do is run at you. On the other hand, if you are playing against somebody such as Xin Zhao or Jarvan or somebody who can close the distance very easily, then you're going to need to play a little bit more passively in your lane and be sure to really focus on freezing your lane closer to your tower. A very important thing about the laning phase is that you buy your own ward. You can't always rely on your jungler to buy your wards for you. In fact, that would just be silly. Your jungler should buy wards, but not for you. So if you're in the top lane, depending on which side you're on, you always want to make sure that you buy a ward on that first time that you go back to lane. The top lane is always the most susceptible to being ganked. Of course, depending on who you're playing against, but regardless, it's always the most susceptible to being ganked since there is a longer distance to run and you are closer to that bush on the bottom area where junglers can run around and gank you. So if you're on the blue team, on the bottom side, the best place, you could say there's 2 of them, either in the tri-bush or potentially right below that so you can kind of see both areas. I generally prefer the tri-bush, but it's just kind of up to you and you're going to have to kind of decide based on the jungle you're against. If you're on the purple side, it's a little easier. You just put it on the exit of the blue camp and that should protect you from most ganks. Of course, you still do have the threat of somebody coming all the way around behind, but that's a little less rare and you can generally avoid that if you have good ward coverage from your... If you're playing in the middle lane, simply put a ward at the enemy's wraith camp. This not only protects you, but it also alerts your bottom lane as to when an enemy jungler might be coming from that area down below to them. And if you're bottom lane, then obviously you want to put a ward in that tri-bush area. Or if you're in the blue team, then you can potentially put one there, or you can put one closer to the dragon. And if your middle lane has done the proper warding, then you should be able to have ward coverage in both areas. that's kind of the idea of the way it should work. Any other advice I can give with surviving ganks is to just always be game aware. Think about the time in the game that it is, possibly even look at your own jungler and think, okay, the enemy jungler started at blue, so that means they're going to be heading towards red most likely, and you can assume that around, 4.5 minutes, you could potentially see a gank somewhere in one of the lanes closest to the red buff if they started at blue. So just think about that and stay very cautious in your lane and never push up at around that time in the map, because you know that's when ganks are probably going to happen. You always want to make sure that you don't go near bushes unless you have vision there, and don't go near the bush to place ward unless you've already seen where the enemy jungler is. You know that you can get extra aggressive whenever the enemy jungler jumps out in another lane, because it's going to take them a while, obviously, to get back to yours. Another thing is to know those routes and try and have your support CV those areas and keep up with him. Of course, that's probably another video of how to, use CV properly. But either way, you might ping and say, hey, ward here, I think the jungler's here, and that can just help you have a little bit more awareness. Also, the last thing is to be aware of sudden aggression by the enemy laner. If you see somebody acting a little bit different, if they're, if they're farming passively in the lane, and then all of a sudden they run up and try and attack you, and it's a little different than what they've been doing, most likely there's a gank coming, and you should run the hell out of there. If not, then maybe they're just, all of a sudden decide, hey, why am I not harassing this person? But usually it's because you're getting ganked. Alright guys, that's all I've got for today. I hope you learned something and you can take some of this advice into account, whether you're a new player or you're more experienced. I hope you got something out of this, and be sure to subscribe. I'll be doing a lot more of these Summoner Academies in the future on various different topics. If you have some stuff that you want to ask me about, be sure to send it in the comments or on a private message, and I'll probably answer those in the future as well. So if you like this video, please hit that like button to let me know. It really helps out. Hit this on your favorites bar, and I'll see you guys around next time, guys. This is Colby Cheese.